We are removing an entire coordinated section of gang violence permanently off the streets, and that's how you deliver a victory.
At 3:47 a.m., under a winter sky frozen in silence, 318 federal agents converged on a warehouse that looked ordinary until the first breach revealed a nightmare. Behind steel doors and concealed walls lay 226 captives, rail maps moving 4.7 tons of narcotics per year, and financial trails exceeding $510 million. The firefight lasted 131 seconds, but it shattered the illusion of safety that Iowa had trusted for decades. What authorities uncovered that night was not a crime scene. It was a hidden empire built inside the nation's own infrastructure. And tonight, we are going to show you exactly how deep it went. Winter had settled heavily over Des Moines that December. The city moved through its routines with the quiet confidence of a place that believed it was far removed from the chaos of border violence and cartel warfare. Iowa was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be simple: cornfields and community centers, church suppers and high school football. The kind of place where families moved specifically to escape the dangers that plagued other regions. But beneath that calm exterior, something had been growing for nearly 8 years. Something patient, something methodical, something that understood the greatest power is the kind no one suspects. The first indication came through a channel no one expected. A routine financial audit of agricultural subsidies flagged 17 transactions that should have been unremarkable, but triggered an algorithm designed to detect patterns rather than amounts. Each transfer sat just below federal reporting thresholds. Each recipient appeared legitimate on paper. But when analysts began mapping the connections, the picture that emerged made them request immediate clearance for interagency escalation. What they found was not corruption. It was architecture. If you believe criminal networks hiding in plain sight should be exposed, comment "Reveal the truth," so this story reaches more people. For 2 decades, Raymond Castellan served as Iowa's Director of Corrections and Public Safety. His reputation was built on discipline, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to community order. 8 professional commendations decorated his office walls. 3 governors had publicly praised his leadership. Local newspapers featured his initiatives as models for regional reform. To the residents of Iowa, Castellan represented exactly what public service was supposed to look like. But federal investigators were learning to read between the official lines. The first anomaly appeared in construction records. A $14.3 million facility expansion that had been approved, funded, and documented as complete. The problem was the facility did not exist. The land parcel listed in the filings was an empty stretch of rural property that had never been developed. Yet the money had moved. Contractors had been paid. Inspections had been signed. The second anomaly was more disturbing. Personnel files for 17 correctional officers showed employment histories that did not align with their documented service records. Some had received paychecks during months when they had been listed as terminated. Others appeared on duty rosters for facilities that had been closed for years. The third anomaly connected the first 2. Travel records showed Castellan making unpublicized trips to border regions in Texas and Arizona at intervals that matched, almost perfectly, with spikes in missing persons reports across 3 Midwestern states. This was not administrative incompetence. This was coordination at a level that required years of planning and access that only a senior official could provide. The Sinaloa cartel had not invaded Iowa. They had been invited. If you think public trust should never be weaponized against citizens, hit like so this investigation reaches more people. The operation that federal agencies would eventually designate as Operation Harvest Moon began with a single intercepted communication. A text message sent from a burner phone to a number registered to a shell corporation in Panama. The message contained no words, only coordinates and a timestamp. When analysts cross-referenced the location against satellite imagery, they found what appeared to be a decommissioned grain processing facility on the outskirts of Davenport. The building had been officially abandoned for 11 years. County records showed it as a liability pending demolition. No utilities were connected. No maintenance requests had been filed. But thermal imaging told a different story. The structure was generating heat signatures consistent with continuous human occupation, not the patterns of squatters or homeless encampments. These were organized, scheduled, the kind of activity that suggested shifts and rotations. For the next 4 months, federal surveillance teams documented everything. Delivery trucks arriving between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Vehicles with plates registered to 14 different states. Personnel who never entered through the same door twice. And most disturbingly, the complete absence of any local law enforcement presence in a 3-mile radius during these windows. Someone was clearing the path. Someone with authority over patrol schedules and response protocols. The investigation expanded to include ICE, DEA, FBI, and DHS counterintelligence units. What they were building was not just a case against drug traffickers. It was a map of systemic infiltration that reached into the foundations of state governance itself. If you believe no official should be above investigation, subscribe now so you never miss the moments where truth and danger collide. The snow had fallen through the night, softening every streetlight and muffling every sound, as if the city itself were holding its breath. At 3:47 a.m., beneath that frozen stillness, a convoy of unmarked SUVs slid through the industrial district. Engines low, headlights dark. Inside were 318 federal agents, ICE tactical teams, DHS strike units, FBI operators who had spent months assembling a picture too disturbing to ignore. Their target was not just one building, it was 7 locations across 4 counties. Simultaneous breaches designed to prevent any element of the network from alerting the others. The primary site, designated Harvest 1, was the warehouse outside Davenport. The teams moved as one, each step drilled through countless rehearsals. The first breach charge snapped the silence like bone. Metal curled inward. Cold air rushed into the hallway. For half a second, everything was still. Then the gunfire came. From elevated positions within the structure, armed enforcers opened fire with weapons that should never have been present in the Midwest. Military-grade automatic rifles. Armor-piercing ammunition. The kind of hardware that the Sinaloa cartel reserves for territorial battles in Mexico, not defensive operations in Iowa. Muzzle flashes sliced through the dark. Bullets pinged off steel pillars as agents dove behind industrial equipment. Tactical shields advanced in short, disciplined bursts. Commands echoed through the chaos with the force of authority that comes only from training and conviction. The firefight lasted 2 minutes and 11 seconds. It felt like an hour. 4 agents went down, 2 with shoulder wounds. 1 struck in the leg. Another knocked unconscious by falling debris. Yet the line never broke. DHS snipers positioned outside shattered the overhead lights with surgical precision, forcing the shooters to retreat into the building's interior. Within moments, tactical teams surged forward. When the final shot faded, a heavy stillness returned. That was when agents heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping from behind a reinforced wall. Not gunfire, not machinery, something human. With hydraulic cutters, they peeled back the false barrier, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was warm, stale, and thick with the unmistakable scent of confinement. Flashlights illuminated the truth one step at a time. The tunnel stretched nearly 700 feet, carved with precision and lined with sound-suppressing material. Along its length were cramped chambers containing 226 victims. Many slumped in sedation, others bound at the wrists, all marked with identification numbers instead of names. Medics rushed past the tactical line. Saline, blankets, oxygen. Some victims had been underground for days. Others, investigators would later learn, had been kept here for months. Near the far exit, agents found hastily abandoned documents, transport schedules, chemical inventories, routing instructions tied to rail networks crossing 7 states, and encrypted communications that would take weeks to fully decode. Among the seized materials was a single file that made even veteran investigators pause. A document bearing Raymond Castellan's digital signature, authorizing the transfer of correctional facility resources to an entity that did not officially exist. The warehouse stood silent once more, but its walls could no longer hide what they had sheltered. If you honor the agents who risked their lives in this operation, comment, respect the badge. The simultaneous raids across Iowa's industrial corridor lasted until dawn. By the time the sun crept over the frozen fields, federal agencies had seized enough evidence to reconstruct nearly a decade of coordinated criminal enterprise. At Harvest 2, a converted livestock facility near Cedar Rapids, agents discovered a processing operation for fentanyl that defied regional expectations. 2.1 million fentanyl pills, 47 kilograms of pure fentanyl powder, mixing equipment capable of producing lethal doses at industrial scale. The chemicals alone were enough to kill every resident of Iowa multiple times over. At Harvest 3, a shuttered packaging plant, they found the Financial Nerve Center, servers containing records for 847 shell corporations, account numbers for banks in 17 countries, and transfer logs showing more than $510 million moving through channels disguised as agricultural investments, charitable donations, and community development grants. At Harvest 4, near the Missouri border, the discovery was different. Not drugs or money, people. 43 individuals being held in conditions that violated every standard of human dignity. Transportation workers from Central America who had been promised legal employment. Women from Southeast Asia who had been told they would find restaurant jobs. teenagers from rural Mexico who had been separated from families and sold into debt bondage. The scale was overwhelming, but the precision was what disturbed investigators most. This was not opportunistic crime. This was infrastructure. And at the center of every document trail, every authorization code, every transport schedule, was the same name: Raymond Castellan. The man Iowa had trusted to protect public safety had spent years converting that trust into a weapon. He had turned the state into a logistics hub for the Sinaloa cartel, a safe corridor through the American heartland where product could move, money could flow, and people could vanish without triggering the alarms that would have activated in border states. Iowa was not a target, it was a strategic asset. If you believe every trafficking network should be dismantled, type shut it down. The cyber forensics team worked through the night in a secured facility that most Iowa residents did not know existed. Their task was to crack the encryption on 17 servers seized during the raids. What they found exceeded their worst projections. The network had a name: Project Cornsilk. The operation had been designed from the beginning with one objective: create a secure corridor through the Midwest that could move drugs, money, and human cargo without interference from federal oversight. The Sinaloa cartel had identified Iowa as the perfect location: far from border scrutiny, minimal DEA presence, a population that trusted its institutions without question. Castellan had been the architect. His position gave him control over correctional facilities that could be used as staging points. His authority over public safety allowed him to manipulate patrol schedules and response protocols. His relationships with state legislators enabled him to influence policy in ways that created gaps precisely where the cartel needed them. The financial structure was equally sophisticated. The Community Advancement Trust, a charity Castellan had publicly supported for years, served as the primary money laundering vehicle. Donations appeared to fund youth programs, disaster relief, and rural development. In reality, the money cycled through a network of shell corporations before returning as clean capital invested in legitimate businesses. The corruption had spread far beyond one man. Federal investigators identified 23 correctional officers who had received payments from cartel-connected accounts. 7 local law enforcement officials whose patrol routes had been systematically adjusted to avoid cartel transport windows. 3 county judges who had dismissed cases involving individuals later identified as network operatives. And most disturbingly, a state legislator who had sponsored agricultural transportation bills that created precisely the regulatory gaps the cartel exploited. This was not infiltration. This was colonization. The Sinaloa cartel had not simply bribed officials. They had planted themselves inside Iowa's governance structure and grown there for nearly a decade. Comment: expose them all. If you believe corruption must be dragged into daylight. The raid on Harvest One was only the beginning. Within 72 hours, federal agencies launched a coordinated operation that would become the largest simultaneous law enforcement action in Midwestern history. At 4:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning, more than 1,200 federal agents deployed across 11 states. The targets were the supply lines, financial nodes, and distribution points that Project Cornsilk had established over 8 years. In Texas, DEA teams hit a warehouse complex that served as the southern entry point for narcotics shipments. They seized 3.2 tons of cocaine, 890 kilograms of methamphetamine, and financial records linking the operation to banking entities in 3 Caribbean nations. In Illinois, FBI agents raided a trucking company that had been transporting modified shipping containers through the Midwest corridor. 23 drivers were arrested. Vehicle inspections revealed hidden compartments capable of moving both narcotics and human cargo across thousands of miles without detection. In Arizona, a joint IC and Border Patrol operation intercepted a convoy approaching a tunnel entrance that connected to a distribution hub the cartel had believed was completely secure. 14 cartel members were captured. The tunnel itself stretched more than half a mile and was equipped with ventilation, electricity, and rail systems for moving product. At ports in Louisiana and Virginia, customs officials detained cargo vessels whose manifests had been altered to conceal shipments tied to the Iowa network. The coordination was unprecedented. The speed was overwhelming, and the results reshaped federal understanding of how deeply Mexican cartels had penetrated American infrastructure. By the operation's conclusion, agencies had seized 7.3 tons of narcotics, $89 million in cash, 847 weapons, and arrested 312 individuals across federal and state jurisdictions. The Sinaloa cartel's Midwest corridor had been dismantled in less than a week, but the human cost of what that corridor had enabled would take far longer to measure. If this level of coordination against criminal networks deserves recognition, tap like now. The 226 survivors rescued from the Iowa tunnels began speaking with investigators as medical teams worked to stabilize their conditions. Their testimonies painted a picture that statistics alone could not capture. Many had arrived believing they were escaping poverty or violence. They had been promised jobs, housing, safety. Instead, They were greeted with fabricated debts ranging from $15,000 to $70,000. Amounts engineered to ensure permanent compliance. Those who questioned the terms were separated from others and relocated to facilities where conditions were deliberately worse. Several victims had crossed state borders more than a dozen times without ever appearing in official records. The system that should have protected them had been designed to make them invisible. Among those rescued were 19 children. The youngest was 7 years old. Some had been transported in the modified rail containers, spending days in darkness alongside sealed packages of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Medical assessments documented oxygen deprivation, chemical exposure, and developmental delays caused by prolonged confinement without sunlight or proper nutrition. One survivor, a woman in her 50s who had been held for 11 months, said during her interview that she had stopped believing rescue was possible. She had assumed that whatever system was supposed to find her had either forgotten or been paid to look elsewhere. She was not entirely wrong. 41 cases that should have triggered federal alerts had been flagged as resolved in state databases. 17 missing persons reports had been marked as voluntary departures despite evidence to the contrary. The system had not simply failed, it had been manipulated to produce silence. If these survivors deserve justice, type never forgotten. The arrest of Raymond Castellan triggered institutional disruption across Iowa's state government. Within days, federal audit teams were pulling records from departments that had operated without scrutiny for years. The results were devastating. 63 administrative files were immediately frozen pending investigation. 11 department heads were placed on administrative leave. More than 400 dormant cases were reopened after analysts discovered systematic irregularities in how they had been processed. The impact on public life was immediate and measurable. In the 3 weeks following the raids, fentanyl-related overdoses in Iowa dropped by 41%. Hospital administrators initially believed their reporting systems had malfunctioned. The decline was too sudden to be explained by anything other than the disruption of supply networks. Freight companies quietly suspended certain rail routes after learning their infrastructure had been weaponized. Corporate compliance officers who had certified shipments without adequate inspection faced questioning from federal regulators. Inside government offices, the atmosphere shifted from routine to reckoning. Officials who had spent years assuming their colleagues shared their commitment to public service now understood that assumption had been dangerously naive. 3 senior administrators resigned without explanation. 2 requested immediate transfers to other states. 1 declined to speak with investigators and retained legal counsel on the day the raids became public. The system that Iowans had trusted was not merely compromised. It had been redesigned from within to serve interests that viewed citizens as commodities rather than constituents. And the man who had orchestrated that redesign had done so while accepting commendations for his service to public safety. Comment accountability now, if you believe reform must reach every level. The scope of Project Cornsilk extended far beyond Iowa's borders. As investigators mapped the network's connections, they discovered a continental operation that had used the Midwest as a central hub for distribution across the eastern United States. The logistics were designed for invisibility. Modified rail containers moved through freight corridors that crossed 12 states. Shipping manifests were altered at specific way stations where personnel had been compromised or schedules had been adjusted to create gaps in oversight. Trucking routes deliberately avoided jurisdictions with active DEA presence. The financial architecture was equally sophisticated. Agricultural investment funds disguised the movement of cartel capital. Charitable foundations processed payments that appeared to support community programs but actually compensated individuals throughout the network. Real estate transactions in 7 states converted drug proceeds into legitimate property holdings. The human trafficking component operated in parallel with the narcotics pipeline. Victims were moved through the same corridors, sometimes in the same containers, often arriving at facilities that served both as drug distribution points and holding locations for individuals being transported to their final exploitation destinations. Federal analysts estimated that at its peak, the network was moving approximately 4.7 tons of narcotics annually through routes that should have been among the most secure in the nation. The Sinaloa cartel had not simply infiltrated American infrastructure. They had integrated themselves into it so completely that their operations resembled legitimate commerce. And they had done so with the active assistance of officials who had sworn to protect the public they ultimately betrayed. If you believe every state deserves protection from this kind of infiltration, subscribe and share this story. What unfolded in Iowa was more than a criminal network being dismantled. It was a warning about what happens when trust is weaponized and vigilance is abandoned. The raids ended in hours, but the recovery will take years. Institutions that residents relied upon were revealed to be compromised at levels no one had anticipated. Families who had believed their communities were safe learned that danger had been operating within systems designed to protect them. And officials who had been honored for their service were exposed as architects of exploitation. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it grows in silence. Sometimes it wears the face of authority. Sometimes it counts on the assumption that certain places are too ordinary, too distant, too trusted to become battlegrounds. The Sinaloa cartel understood this. They built their American corridor not in border cities where scrutiny was highest, but in the heartland where scrutiny was lowest. Raymond Castellan understood this too. He spent 2 decades constructing a reputation that made questioning him seem unnecessary. And for 8 years, that reputation shielded an operation that moved billions in narcotics and destroyed hundreds of lives. The 226 survivors now face years of recovery. Some will carry the physical consequences of their captivity for the rest of their lives. Others will struggle with psychological wounds that have no visible markers but shape every moment. The families who spent months not knowing what happened to missing loved ones now have answers. But those answers bring grief as often as relief. And the citizens of Iowa now understand that the safety they assumed was not a guarantee. It was a responsibility that requires constant attention, institutional accountability, and the willingness to question even those who appear most trustworthy. If you are still watching, tap like so more people see this story. If you believe corruption at any level must be confronted, comment, expose the truth. If you want these investigations to continue reaching audiences who need to hear them, subscribe now. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real issues facing communities across America. The names of officials and specific operational details have been created for narrative purposes. But the threats depicted, cartel infiltration, institutional corruption, human trafficking, and the weaponization of public trust, are dangers that every citizen should understand. Vigilance is not optional. It is a duty. And silence is never safety. It is only permission for those who exploit it.